Welcome to this presentation on the advancement of golf clubs and those people important in the evolution of those clubs. Early golf was probably played with crude sticks and balls. The sticks most likely from various types of trees, and the balls were rocks. The shepherd's crook is often used in Scottish folklore as a potential golf club used to hit rocks or pebbles into a hole. It begs the questions of what was the loft of the crook, the flexibility of the crook, was it the original all-in-one club, and what material was used for the grip? With all kidding aside, from the earliest days, golf makers have always looked for the right type of materials to produce desirable club qualities. In the early evolution of the game, golfers individually made their own clubs to the liking of oneself. In 1603, King James VI commissioned the first set of matched clubs from a bow maker named William Mayne. This probably raised the importance and prestige of those who were to become club makers. As time progressed, club makers and golfers alike were probably scouring the countryside looking for desirable wood species for club heads like oak, cherry, beech, and apple, while maybe using ash and hazel for shafts. The oldest set of clubs date back to 1741, which consisted of two woods and a putter, which is notable since it was made by club maker Simon Cosar and consisted of an iron head. This picture is not that putter, but Simon Cosar's name and where he was from, Lee, is imprinted on the golf club. From a golf club collector's point of view, Simon Cosar clubs are quite rare. Making the first iron clubs was probably attempted in the late 1700s and basically tried up to 1870 with not much success due to the crudely built nature of them along with them being extremely heavy. In addition, the wide use of the feathery golf ball when struck with iron clubs was often destroyed. In 1819, the Society of St. Andrews appointed Allen Robertson official ball maker, which consisted of making the feathery, and a Hugh Phillip, a local carpenter, as official club maker. At the time, the golf clubs were called long-nose woods. A set of clubs consisted of 6 wood clubs carried under the left arm. The long-nosed woods were designed to sweep a feathery ball off the links-type turf. To be categorized as a long-nosed club, the head had to measure at least 4 inches in length and made prior to 1890. The most valued long-nosed clubs are those made prior to 1850, when the feathery ball was in its prime. Hugh Phillip had used wood from the ash tree to produce the shafts. That changed in 1826 when his nephew and apprentice, Robert Forgan, imported hickory from the United States, which provided the best quality and performing shafts of the time. Hickory shafts were to remain popular until the early 1930s. In preparing the hickory shafts for use, Forgan would store the shafts in black sheds off the 17th hole at St. Andrews. It would take approximately a year for the shafts to cure before use. As a side note, when they built the St. Andrews Hotel off the 17th fairway in the 1960s, there was concern about the demolition of the black sheds and the impact that would be lost on the hole. The hotel agreed to recreate the sheds, which are circled in this photograph. With the passing of Hugh Phillip in 1856, Robert Forgan took over the club-making business and saw it grow even in the face of competition from Old Tom Morris, David Anderson and Sons, and later in the 1900, A.J. Spalding, which had shops in Fife and London. This photograph shows Robert Forgan sitting on the left and one of his sons standing. Robert Forgan was to die in 1900 at a time of considerable change in club making. During Robert Forgan's later years, wooden club heads were becoming more round, resembling more of clubs of today. Also, irons like the niblick were being developed. One of the clubs that ended the reign of the long-nosed clubs was the brassy around 1890. The The brassy was a wooden club that was more lofted than a driver or a play club, but less than a long spoon or like a 3-wood. The brassy was probably comparable to a 2-wood. It also had the added feature of a brass plate that made the club last longer. Club makers imported persimmon from the United States around 1900 to make their woods. Persimmon woods would have a long run until the advent of the metal woods. Forgan & Sons did well in the face of a changing golf market and competition. World War II, however, was a downfall for their business. International competition, mainly from the United States, was one of the major causes. However, after the war, Spalding reopened Forgan & Sons, but in 1963 the company finally closed its doors. The white building off the 18th hole at St. Andrews is the Woolen Mill, which was originally Forgan & Sons club-making company. In the late 1970s, Gary Adams, who was working for TaylorMade and later was to found his own club-making company, Adams, helped develop the metal wood. Shown here is a 1981 TaylorMade driver. The complete demise of persimmon woods occurred in 1991 when Callaway released the Big Bertha oversized driver. At the time it was 190 cc's. In the middle 1990s, titanium heads were created that were strong and light. Irons, as previously mentioned, were not used much prior to 1870 due to the rudimentary construction and their ability to destroy feathery balls. It was not until 1870s when drop forging, where you heated the metal and dropped a hammer on the metal in a preformed die. Basically, you pressed the club head into shape. This was a big advancement over hand-forged clubs, which was more like how a blacksmith would shoe a horse. The popularity of irons really started with the release of the Haskell ball in 1901. Grooves were added to the face of irons in 1902, basically to provide backspin when you hit a shot. There was a variety of different groove patterns developed at this time. During the early 1900s, irons were given names, like Mashie Niblick, or the Mashie, or the mid-iron, and then Niblick, which was probably the most popular iron. It was not until the 1930s that the numbering of irons became the standard. From the early 1900s to 1930 was a time of considerable club innovation. The advent of a wide variety of clubs, from the somewhat bizarre, like the one shown here, the giant Niblick, which could measure up to 6 inches in diameter, or some of the specialty clubs shown here in this picture. The one circled on the left is a scoop or concave sand wedge type of club, which was eventually ruled illegal. Another one I liked is the water club circled on the right. I guess the water was to funnel through the hole, which was slightly smaller than the ball. It would be fun to try some of these clubs out. A popular specialty club was the Rut Niblick. It was used to get the ball out of depressions caused by horse-drawn wagon wheels, carts, sheep, or other animal footprints, to name a few. It was not uncommon that a golfer might be carrying between 20 and 30 clubs. In 1939, the Royal and Ancient Society set the club limit to 14, which stands today. From these early clubs, you can see why I think that the most controversial issues that arise in golf involve the legality and characteristics of the golf clubs. Whether it was center-shafted putters that were banned in the early 1900s, or a style of putting like croquet putting that Sam Snead used toward the end of his career, and is shown here, and was eventually banned, to the current ruling on banning anchor-style putting. Deciding whether a golf club is legal within the rules is a complex and difficult decision. In the 1960s, a major change in how we made irons occurred. Karsten Solheim, who founded Ping Golf Company, pioneered the use of investment casting to get the heel-toe balance he wanted. Investment casting is making a mold with a high degree of detail and pouring liquid metal in. Through a series of steps, you get a highly reproducible club head from one to another. The first Ping irons made from investment casting were released in 1969. During the early years, foundries used what was known as foundry-friendly stainless steel, referred to as 17-4, which you can see that designation on this club. This type of alloy had a reputation for being hard because it was. Since then, most club heads are formed using investment casting with a wide variety of alloys used. In today's world, golfers often discuss whether a golf club is better than another based on whether they are forged or cast. It is not the process that makes the club hard or soft. It is the material used. As previously mentioned, hickory golf shafts were the shaft of choice from 1826 to the 1930s. The characteristics of shafts, I think, are often overlooked by the golfer. They are extremely important in providing distance and control. Since the beginning of golf, golfers have looked for just the right flex, feel, weight, durability, and consistency. Steel shafts were to come into their own in the late 1920s. For years in trying to develop a steel shaft, concern centered on hollow versus solid, and getting the right strength at the lightest weight. In the late 1920s, step-down design in steel shaft was a major breakthrough. In 1931, Billy Burke won the U.S. Open with steel shafts for the first time, and by the mid-1930s, hickory was all but forgotten. Since the development of steel shafts, various other materials have been tried. In the mid-1960s to the 1970s, fiberglass and aluminum had about a 10-year run, and titanium shafts were tried in the 1990s. In all of these cases, these shafts went the way of hickory. Graphite is a shaft that was originally popular in the early 1970s. Graphite had been used in the aerospace industry, and Union Carbide, who at the time had the graphite, was working with club manufacturers to bring it to market. Graphite shafts were extremely popular from about 1970 to 1973 because how light they were, but by 1975 they had a rapid decline in use because of reported poor durability and performance. Graphite was reborn in the mid-1980s and has continued to be the shaft of choice in drivers and to a lesser extent in irons. Graphite is widely used in sports equipment including tennis rackets and fishing rods. This concludes this brief look at the history and evolution of the golf club.